Maybe you feel better if you get outside of that bubble of suffering. Do you suffer from long COVID? That's crazy. Hey, everybody, I'm Steve Green with Bill Whittle and Scott Ott, and this is Right Angle, brought to you by the members of BillWhittle.com. And Scott is already shaking his head at me. I think this might be a new record. All right, so you've probably heard of long COVID on the news, and these are the folks, my heart goes out to them, that, a year, 2 years after recovering from a COVID-19 infection, they're still suffering from the fatigue. They're still suffering from the being out of breath and all of these symptoms that have just lingered on and on and on, except, according to a new study, it looks like it probably is. It almost certainly is all in their head. Gentlemen, I don't normally like to repeat a whole lot of numbers, but I gotta at least give you some of the science here. So I'm just not making this up and not just making fun of people, although it's tempting on certain days. The study didn't involve a great number of people, but they were very thoroughly studied. I mean, they scienced the crap out of this, to borrow a phrase. There were 189 known COVID recovery people. They'd had COVID. They're better now, but they feel like they're suffering from these long COVID symptoms. And almost none of them were hospitalized. They wanted to filter out the folks who were hospitalized because a lot of those people did suffer long-term lung damage. And you don't want to tell them, hey, it's all in your head. They're really hurting still. And they had 120 people in the control group, people who had never had COVID, tested negative for antibodies, all of that stuff. So it's a really solid control group. And what they found when they went to the National Institutes of Health for an extensive battery of tests is that the long COVID sufferers versus the control group found basically no differences, none, in lung function, heart function, oxygen levels, ability to walk distances, inflammation, infection, all of the things you would expect to find, all of the things that long COVID sufferers were complaining about weren't there medically. Scott, this is a difficult situation because you have people who actually had COVID, but don't feel like they've ever recovered. What do you say to somebody in that position?
Because it's a relatively small study and recent, and normally I read the entire Journal of the American Medical Association on a weekly basis, or however frequently it comes out. Whatever that frequency is, I read it all the way through. But I'm not a doctor. I couldn't even qualify to play one on TV. But I do see this in this story, and to me, this fascinates me, is that this is a positive for us, actually. Your mind does not distinguish between something that actually happens and something that you only vividly imagine. Now, when you think about that, you think, oh, well, isn't that just a characteristic of mental illness? No, it's a characteristic of brain function. And if you are able to tap into this characteristic of brain function and essentially vividly imagine that which you wish to see in the world or in your life, then you can program your brain to respond appropriately. And some people, I actually wrote an essay about this one time because it fascinates me where, Dale Carnegie wrote a book years ago called How to Stop Worrying and Start Living. And then I read another book recently that basically said, instead of trying to change your basic nature, why don't you figure out what your basic nature is and work with it? And it just occurred to me that people who worry a lot are essentially forecasting the future. They are vividly imagining a future that does not yet exist.
Exactly.
And may not ever exist, probably will not ever exist, but they're vividly imagining it. And through the power of that vivid imagination, they're bringing about. Now, this isn't some mystical thing like you're somehow manifesting this in the universe or whatever. You're basically just, it's ones and zeros. You are programming your brain to say, hey, bad things are about to happen, bad things are about to happen, bad things are about to happen. Hey, look, is that a bad thing? That looks like a bad thing. It's coming down the road, right? To me, I knew bad things were going to happen. Here it comes. If you can tap this kind of power that your mind has and say, well, what if I woke up every day and thought, oh my goodness, I hope something fantastic doesn't happen today. I mean, what if something amazing happened today? What if I accomplished that thing I really wanted to accomplish? What if I met that person I really wanted to meet? What if I fell in love? What happens if I actually settled down and had a family and had a beautiful life? Oh my goodness. I think I'm going to conjure that for a while and chew that cud until I program my brain into believing that that's the way it happens. Now, I'm not saying these people are mentally ill who think that they have long COVID. I don't have a way to evaluate that. But it almost doesn't matter, because if you are convinced in your mind that that is so, then your body will play that out. Your brain sends the commands to your body to react in accordance to what you already believe. And you will notice things. Your mind has, it's something called the reticular activating system. I call it the radio dial. And so your mind has this radio dial, and you're constantly fiddling with that radio dial, and there are signals coming all the time through the air. But when you tune that radio dial, which my grandfather said used to be a cat's whisker, they used to call it, where they'd find that frequency, then you receive the signal. Well, we're being bombarded all the time with these signals from other people, from ourselves, from the environment, from media, but we choose where to turn that radio dial. So kind of, if you've got this feeling that you got long COVID, or if you're just depressed and sad and think that things aren't going well and wonder why you didn't make the life you thought you would make, maybe you need to start fiddling around and moving around on the dial until you can bring in another signal, and then start worrying about getting that and making that a successful thing in your life.
Scott, I know exactly what you mean about this ability for your brain to sort of materialize what it wants to see or feel. For example, I look around my office and I can see liquor bottles everywhere when in fact I know there are only 3 or 4. So,
right. Well, after a while, those 4 will look like 6 or 8.
Well, there you go. Mission accomplished. Bill, This came from a long Twitter thread, and we can embed the link, and the link will actually take viewers to this study. So there's some really fascinating stuff in there. But the Twitter summary said there was a large burden of symptoms and worse mental health post-COVID, particularly among those with any kind of anxiety, but no difference in objective neurocognition, no evidence of ongoing systemic inflammation or immune activation or any organ damage whatsoever. And I found that incidence of higher levels of anxiety among these folks to be telling. And I think it goes right into what Scott was saying. How much of that do you think might be due to people actually paying attention and believing everything that they've heard from our medical government complex over the last 2 years?
Well, we're talking about a couple hundred people, 187 or something like that.
189.
So in the study, there's more than that more people than that claiming the symptoms. But if you think about 330 million Americans, it's an astonishingly low number. Whatever the real number is, it's a really low number. And I don't think that the number of people who are claiming to be suffering from long COVID, again, I don't mean to offend anybody who may be feeling this, but I don't imagine that that statistically they're much larger than a group of people who you would normally classify as hypochondriacs. There's a significant percentage of the population is a hypochondriac. As a matter of fact, how many times have you guys seen variations of this sketch where somebody's reading about some new disease and they're reading out the symptoms, and somebody over there in the room is one of them is sweating, and it's
from
we've seen it
airplane
100 times.
Yeah.
Right. So and many other places. And so the reason that sketch is funny is because everybody realizes that when you hear things of import like that, like here's this terrible new disease and here are the symptoms, you start visualizing them. In some cases, you start feeling them. So I think that's a part of it. I think also a part of it is, I'm the only one of the three of us that I didn't have long COVID. I had sort of medium short COVID. But it does mess you up. And for several months afterwards, you could definitely feel I felt like my biochemistry was changed. I was really fatigued off and stuff. So I suppose some people kind of stay there, mentally. There may have been a perfectly real biological reason for why they're feeling sluggish or whatever the case may be as a result of being infected, because it does play with your mind a little bit. But perhaps they just got used to it. And frankly, I got to tell you, I think a significant part of this is the ailment du jour, right? I mean, it is the topic of conversation and the only topic of conversation essentially for 2 years. And so I think when you throw all these things together, I think given the relatively small numbers of people, it's not surprising to hear that this was psychosomatic. Scott's right about the brain and what the brain can create or not create. There's a lot of things the brain just blocks out. For instance, when your eyes dart around or when you blink, you don't see a swish pan. Your brain just stops processing that visual information. As a matter of fact, right now, everybody who's watching this, your nose is in the shot. You don't realize it because your brain basically filters it out. But your nose is visible to your eyes when you think about it. And if you do it now, you'll realize, yeah, there it is.
Yeah, some more than others.
Yeah, so there you go. So look, I'm sympathetic to these things, but I'm also very curious to know what the voting demographics of the people who are suffering from this is. And the reason I say that is because here in Los Angeles, it's really significantly reduced, fortunately. But I still see a handful of people out there wearing masks, just like defiantly now. Yeah. And it makes me wonder how much of this long COVID thing is a form of it's almost like a political ribbon, that they're wearing. You know what I mean? Those of you who claim that COVID was nothing, well, I not only did I have COVID, I've still got it. That kind of thing.
Yeah. Well, I do not want to make light of anybody suffering from what they're calling long COVID. As Scott and Bill both pointed out, if you believe you're suffering from this, you are suffering. You are hurting. You are tired. You do not feel well. And for it to go on for months or even a couple of years, I can't even imagine that kind of suffering. And I'm not going to make light of that. But maybe I can try and sort of talk out what might be going on here. It's not that people aren't suffering. It's that there's something there that is trying to be virtuous, but it's been corrupted by what they've been told and what they believed since about February of 2020. We were told it was virtuous to take all of these precautionary measures that turned out harmed the economy and didn't actually help very much, if at all. We were told it was you were almost sort of a martyr to the cause if you got sick, and maybe if you stay sick, you maintain some of that easy virtue. And again, I'm not saying this to belittle anyone, but maybe you feel better if you get outside of that bubble of suffering and look around at that real world. It's becoming a pretty good place again, at least for now. That's your right angle on that. Thanks so much for watching. Remember, content like this needs sponsors like you. So if you aren't a member of BillWhittle.com, why don't you go over to the site right now, become a member today, or even just make a one-time donation. Every little bit helps. Thanks so much for watching. We'll see you next time.